My name is Amelia Carter, and I was 27 years old the morning my stepbrother calmly emptied an entire mug of black coffee over the white blouse I had carefully ironed for the biggest interview of my life. The stain spread across the fabric like spilled ink while he leaned against the kitchen counter wearing a satisfied smile. I stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. My stepmother didn't even glance up from the newspaper. "It's only a shirt, Amelia," she said in a tired voice. "You're always making everything into a tragedy." My father sighed as if I were the problem. "Ryan has enough pressure already. Don't start another argument." I said nothing. I quietly changed into another blouse that had a tiny tear near one sleeve and drove 3 hours to the interview. I had no idea that before the week was over, the people who had spent years convincing me I was ordinary would be forced to watch the truth destroy every lie they had built. If you have ever felt invisible inside your own family, this story is for you. Let me tell you how everything began. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. Before my mother passed away when I was 9, our house had been full of music, baking, and laughter. After she died, silence became another member of the family. 2 years later, my father married Vanessa. She brought her 14-year-old son, Ryan, into our home. Overnight, the family photographs changed. Pictures of my mother slowly disappeared from the walls until only one remained. Inside an old photo album hidden in the attic, Vanessa had a gift for making favoritism sound reasonable. Ryan was older, so he deserved more freedom. Ryan had struggled after the divorce, so he deserved more patience. Ryan was naturally gifted, so he deserved more opportunities. Every explanation sounded fair by itself. Together, they built a life where I was expected to be grateful for whatever was left over. When I was 13, I won first place in the county science fair after spending 6 months designing a low-cost water filtration project. My teacher hugged me. The local newspaper printed my photograph. That evening, I rushed home carrying the blue ribbon, hoping for the first real celebration I could remember. Ryan had scored 2 goals during a soccer match that afternoon. Vanessa taped his team photograph to the refrigerator before I even walked through the front door. My ribbon stayed inside my backpack until I quietly placed it in a drawer weeks later. My father noticed it months afterward and asked why I had never shown anyone. I smiled and said I forgot. The truth was harder to explain. By high school, I had learned that expecting recognition only led to disappointment. I poured my energy into studying instead. Biology fascinated me. Every answer uncovered another question. I spent weekends volunteering at a community health clinic, filing paperwork, translating for elderly Spanish-speaking patients, and watching physicians who treated frightened strangers with remarkable kindness. One afternoon, an emergency physician named Dr. Elena Morris noticed me staying long after my volunteer shift had ended. "You ask more questions than most first-year residents," she laughed. "I want to understand everything." She smiled. "That's a dangerous quality." "Why?" "Because people who want to understand everything usually end up carrying other people's pain." I remembered those words for years. The day I announced that I wanted to become a physician, Ryan laughed before anyone else could speak. "You?" he asked. "You faint when you get blood drawn." "I fainted once when I was 12. "Same difference." Vanessa folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. "Medicine isn't only about grades, Amelia. It's about confidence. Ryan has leadership. You're more comfortable helping behind the scenes." My father nodded slowly. "There's nothing wrong with supporting people who become doctors." That sentence stayed with me longer than they ever intended. I earned a scholarship to the University of Washington. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I worked evenings shelving, books at the campus library, and weekends as a medical receptionist. While other students spent spring break traveling, I picked up extra shifts. I graduated near the top of my class with honors in molecular biology, and almost no time left for anything except work. Instead of applying to medical school immediately, I accepted a position as a patient care coordinator at the Children's Oncology Center attached to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. My plan was simple: gain experience, save money, apply 1 year later. 3 weeks into the job, I met a little boy named Noah Ramirez. He was 8 years old with bright brown eyes and a smile that somehow survived every treatment. He had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia only 2 months earlier. His mother, Isabel, spoke English well enough for daily conversation, but medical terminology overwhelmed her. During our first meeting, she apologized for asking the doctors to repeat themselves. "I'm scared I'll misunderstand something important." she whispered. I switched into Spanish. The relief on her face appeared instantly. For the next hour, we reviewed every medication, every appointment, every laboratory result. Noah listened quietly before asking the question nobody else in the room had answered. Am I going to lose all my hair? His mother started crying. I knelt beside his chair. Maybe, I admitted gently, but hair grows back. Courage doesn't have to. He looked at me carefully. Promise? I promise. From that day forward, he insisted on calling me Miss Amelia instead of simply Amelia. Officially, he wasn't even assigned to my caseload anymore after his treatment stabilized, but I kept visiting anyway. Sometimes we played card games. Sometimes we built Lego spaceships. Sometimes we simply watched rain slide down the hospital windows while talking about superheroes. He loved astronomy more than anything. If I get better, he once told me, I'm going to build rockets. And if you build rockets, you have to come see the first launch. It would be an honor. He held out his little finger. Pinky promise. I laughed and linked mine with his. Pinky promise. Outside the hospital, my own family barely knew anything about Noah. They rarely asked about my work, except to compare it with Ryan's latest achievements. Ryan had graduated from business school and joined a prestigious consulting firm. Every holiday dinner became another celebration of his promotions, bonuses, and expensive vacations. When I mentioned spending Christmas Eve at the hospital because one of my young patients was afraid to be alone, Vanessa smiled politely. You're too emotionally attached, she said. Professional people learn to separate work from feelings. I didn't argue. Some people only understood success when it came with money. Others understood that success sometimes looked like sitting beside a frightened child until sunrise. I knew which version mattered more. I had no idea that Noah's family would someday place something in my hands that would change my entire future and expose the people who had spent years trying to keep me in the shadows. The months passed faster than I expected. Noah fought through treatment with a determination that humbled everyone on the oncology floor. Even on the hardest days, he found reasons to smile. When the chemotherapy made him too weak to leave his bed, we built imaginary rockets out of paper cups and tongue depressors. Every rocket carried a handwritten mission. One was going to Mars, another was heading to Saturn. Noah always insisted that the biggest rocket would someday carry children with cancer. Somewhere they would never have to be afraid again. His mother, Isabel, never stopped believing. Every morning she sat beside his bed reading children's books or softly, humming the songs her own mother had sung back in Mexico. Some evenings, after my shift officially ended, I stayed another hour just to help her understand the doctors, updates, or simply keep her company. Nobody asked me to stay. Nobody paid me for those extra hours. I stayed because I couldn't imagine leaving. One rainy afternoon, Noah handed me a folded piece of notebook paper. Don't open it until you're a doctor, he said. I smiled. What if that takes years? I'll wait. I slipped the paper into my notebook without reading it. Deal. By the beginning of the following spring, my supervisor, Karen Whitmore, called me into her office. You've done remarkable work here, Amelia. I laughed softly. I mostly fill out paperwork. Karen shook her head. No, paperwork doesn't make. Frightened parents ask whether you're working today before they agree to difficult conversations. She opened a folder. I've been asked to nominate one employee for the Northwest Compassion Fellowship. It's awarded to healthcare workers who demonstrate exceptional patient advocacy. I stared at her. There are nurses here who've worked 20 years. And I'm nominating you. For the first time in years, someone saw me exactly as I hoped to be seen. The fellowship came with a small grant, and more importantly, mentorship from physicians across the state. During one conference, I met Dr. Samuel Hayes, a pediatric oncologist known for training medical students. After listening to me describe my work, he asked one question. Why haven't you applied to medical school yet? Money. He smiled knowingly. That's a temporary obstacle. I looked away. My family doesn't exactly believe I belong there. He leaned back. Medicine isn't inherited, Amelia. It's earned. Those words stayed with me. That summer, I finally decided to begin my applications. Every evening after work, I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my apartment writing personal statements. I wrote about resilience, compassion, and the lessons patients had taught me. More than anyone else, I wrote about Noah. Not because his illness was tragic, because his courage had changed me. I never mentioned details that should remain private. Instead, I described how one little boy had taught me that healing sometimes meant listening more than speaking. The essay took almost 2 months to finish. When I finally read the last sentence, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood: pride. I saved the document, backed it up twice, and emailed a copy to Dr. Hayes for feedback. 3 days later, my father called. "You haven't visited in almost a year." "I've been working." "I know. Vanessa wants everyone together this weekend." I hesitated. Family dinners rarely ended well. Still, maybe things had changed. Maybe enough years had passed. Maybe people could become different. So on Saturday morning, I drove home carrying a small overnight bag and my laptop. Ryan's new luxury SUV was already parked outside. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. Vanessa hugged Ryan first. My father shook my hand. Dinner was polite. Ryan spent 40 minutes describing a promotion at his consulting firm. Vanessa praised his leadership. My father talked about investment markets. Eventually, someone remembered I existed. "So," Vanessa asked while cutting her chicken, "are you still answering phones at the hospital?" I smiled politely. "I'm coordinating patient care now." "Oh." She nodded as though discussing the weather. "And you're still talking about medical school?" "I've already started applying." Ryan chuckled into his drink. "Competition is brutal." "I know. You'll probably need something extraordinary to stand out." "I've done my best." He smiled in a way I couldn't quite understand. "I hope that's enough." Later that night, I sat in my old bedroom making final edits to one scholarship application before going to sleep. The Wi-Fi was slow. Without thinking, I logged into the family cloud storage account my father had created years earlier. It was easier than transferring files between devices. I uploaded the newest version of my essay before closing the laptop. I never noticed Ryan standing outside my bedroom door. The next morning, he was unusually friendly. He even offered to make breakfast. As I packed my bag, he leaned against the doorway. "So, what's your essay about?" "Patient care." "Anyone specific?" "A child who reminded me why I want to become a doctor." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds powerful." I didn't realize then that he wasn't making conversation. He was confirming something. 3 weeks later, I submitted every application. Life returned to normal, or at least it seemed to. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Karen walked into my office carrying a sealed envelope. "Amelia," she said with a smile. "One of the schools sent this by express courier." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Congratulations." I had been invited to interview at one of the most respected medical schools in the country. I laughed. Then I cried. Karen hugged me. "So," she whispered, "ready to become Dr. Amelia Carter?" I smiled through my tears. "I've been ready for a very long time." I didn't know that someone else had already seen every word of my application. And before I ever stepped into that interview room, the person I trusted least was already planning to make sure I never walked out with an acceptance. The interview was scheduled for the second Monday in October. For weeks, I prepared with almost military discipline. Every evening after work, I practiced answering ethical questions, reviewed medical case discussions, and reread my application until I could quote entire paragraphs from memory. Dr. Hayes conducted 2 mock interviews with me over video calls, refusing to let me settle for average answers. "You know medicine," he told me. "Now let them know you." The Friday before my interview, Noah was discharged after another successful treatment cycle. He was still far from cured, but for the first time in months, he was well enough to spend a few weeks at home. Before leaving, he handed me a small cardboard rocket he had painted blue. I finished it. "It looks amazing." When you're nervous, remember astronauts get scared too. I smiled. "And what do they do?" "They launch anyway." I placed the little rocket carefully inside my bag. It became my good luck charm. The evening before my interview, my father called. "Your stepmother wants to wish you luck. Why don't you stay here tonight? The school is only an hour away from us." Every instinct told me to decline, yet a small part of me still wanted my family to believe in me. So I accepted. When I arrived, Ryan was already there. He greeted me with unusual warmth. "Big day tomorrow." "It is." "I really hope you get in." For a moment, I almost believed him. Dinner passed peacefully. Vanessa even asked polite questions about the hospital, though she spent most of the meal talking about Ryan's latest business award. After everyone went upstairs, I hung my navy blazer in the guest room closet, placed Noah's blue rocket beside my folder, and went to bed. At 6 the next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent. I showered, dressed carefully, and reached for my blazer. The left sleeve had been sliced clean through from shoulder to cuff. Not torn. Cut. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. The fabric hung open in two pieces. I heard footsteps behind me. Ryan stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee. His eyes dropped to the blazer. What happened? His voice sounded rehearsed. I have no idea. Vanessa appeared behind him. Oh dear, she sighed. Maybe it snagged on something. It didn't snag. Ryan shrugged. Accidents happen. I looked directly at him. Neither of us spoke. Then my father walked upstairs. We'll buy another one after the interview. There isn't time, I answered quietly. I wore the damaged blazer anyway. The cut sleeve was impossible to hide completely, but folding my arm carefully made it less noticeable. As I drove toward the university, anger slowly gave way to determination. If someone wanted me distracted, I would refuse to give them that victory. The admissions building overlooked a river lined with autumn trees glowing, red and gold. Inside, everything felt calm. Applicants sat quietly reviewing notes while admissions. Staff offered coffee and tea. My first interview was with Professor Linda Chen, a physician scientist. She asked thoughtful questions about research, ethics, and patient communication. The conversation flowed naturally. When it ended, she smiled. You clearly care about people. That's why I'm here. I believe you. An hour later, I met my second interviewer, Dr. Marcus Ellison, Director of Clinical Education. His office walls were covered with photographs of graduating classes. He welcomed me warmly. Halfway through the interview, his attention drifted toward the folder resting on my lap. I hope you don't mind me asking, he said gently. What happened to your jacket? I looked down at the damaged sleeve. For a second, I considered inventing an excuse. Instead, I told the truth. It was damaged this morning. By accident? I paused. I honestly don't think so. He studied my expression. You still came? I've spent too many years letting other people decide what I deserve. A slow smile appeared on his face. That's an interesting answer. The interview lasted almost 90 minutes. As I stood to leave, Dr. Ellison surprised me. Miss Carter? Yes? May I ask one final question? Of course. He opened a folder on his desk. Inside was a printed copy of my personal statement. Several sentences were highlighted in yellow. I've read thousands of essays during my career. I can imagine. I remember good writing. He tapped one highlighted paragraph. A frightened child doesn't always need another explanation. Sometimes he only needs one familiar face willing to stay until morning. I nodded. I wrote that after sitting with one of my patients. I thought so. He leaned back thoughtfully. Because I read almost the exact same paragraph 6 months ago. My heartbeat stopped. I'm sorry, what? A candidate from last year's admissions cycle submitted an essay containing remarkably similar wording. He slid another sheet across the desk. The names had been covered, but several paragraphs were visible. My hands began to shake. Entire sentences mirrored my own ideas. Not identical. Changed just enough, but unmistakably mine. Dr. Ellison watched me carefully. I wanted to see your reaction before saying anything. I couldn't speak. He closed the folder. I believe I have my answer. Before I left, he handed me his business card. If you remember anything that might explain this, call me. I walked outside in complete silence. The autumn wind carried leaves across the courtyard. Suddenly, I remembered the family cloud drive, the weekend at my father's house, Ryan standing quietly outside my bedroom, the strange questions about my essay. It wasn't proof, but for the first time, the pieces fit together. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Hayes. How did it go? I stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. Better than expected. But I think someone stole more than my words. I didn't realize that before the week ended, a forgotten digital backup, a hospital mentor, and one innocent mistake Ryan made years earlier would uncover a betrayal far bigger than either of us imagined. The drive home felt longer than the drive to the interview. I replayed every conversation in my mind, especially Dr. Ellison's quiet question about my personal statement. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew one thing with certainty. I wasn't imagining it. The next morning, I called Dr. Hayes and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. Did you ever save an earlier draft anywhere besides your laptop? I closed my eyes. The family cloud drive. Can you still access it? Within minutes, I was logged in. The document history revealed every edit I had made over 2 months. Buried among the entries was something I had never noticed before. Viewed by Ryan Carter. 3 separate times. The first view had occurred just 2 days after. I uploaded the draft at my father's house. I took screenshots immediately. Then I remembered something else. Months earlier, Ryan had proudly shown the family that his consulting firm had given him free access to professional AI writing software. He had joked that it could rewrite anything without leaving obvious fingerprints. At the time, everyone laughed. Now it wasn't funny anymore. Dr. Hayes encouraged me to report everything to the admissions office, not because I wanted revenge, but because academic honesty mattered. 2 days later, I met with Dr. Ellison and the school's admissions integrity committee. I handed them the document history, timestamps, and email records showing when I had first sent drafts to Dr. Hayes. The committee quietly thanked me and promised to investigate. A week passed, then another. I focused on my work instead of waiting for phone calls. Noah continued getting stronger. One afternoon, he raced down the hospital hallway wearing a paper astronaut helmet. "Miss Amelia, what happened?" "My blood counts are better." His mother hugged both of us at once, laughing through tears. For the first time since I had met them, hope felt heavier than fear. That evening, Isabel handed me the folded note. Noah had made me promise not to open until I became a doctor. "I think," she said softly, "you've waited long enough." Inside was a child's uneven handwriting. "Dear future Dr. Amelia, thank you for staying when everyone else was busy. When I was scared, you never looked scared." That made me brave too. I think doctors are people who help others believe tomorrow is coming. You're already one. I read it twice before I could fold it again. A month later, my phone rang. It was Dr. Ellison. "The committee has completed its review." I held my breath. "We confirmed that another applicant had submitted writing derived from your original essay." He paused. "That applicant has withdrawn from consideration after being confronted with the evidence." I already knew who it was. Ryan had never expected anyone to compare 2 essays written a year apart. The investigation never became public. His consulting company, however, learned that he had falsified work on multiple client reports as well. Within weeks, he lost his position. For the first time in his life, charm couldn't rescue him from consequences. My father came to see me shortly afterward. He looked older than I remembered. "I failed you," he said quietly. I kept telling myself I was keeping the peace. I didn't answer. All I really did was reward the wrong person. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "You can't change what happened. I know. But you can decide who you become now." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. A few months later, he moved into a small apartment of his own. He and Vanessa separated soon afterward. We didn't repair our relationship overnight. Healing never works that way. It happened one conversation at a time. Then, on a bright April morning, an email arrived. "Congratulations. I had been offered admission to medical school." I read the first sentence 5 times before believing it. I called Dr. Hayes. He laughed before I could finish speaking. I knew it. Next, I called Karen at the hospital. She screamed so loudly that several nurses came, running into her office thinking something terrible had happened. The last call I made was to Isabel. She answered on the second ring. They accepted me. There was silence. Then I heard her crying. "Noah," she called out. "Guess who became a doctor?" From somewhere in the background came a familiar, excited voice. "I told you she would." On the first day of orientation, I wore the same navy blazer. The sleeve had been professionally repaired, but one tiny stitch remained visible if you knew where to look. Inside the pocket rested Noah's blue cardboard rocket and the folded letter he had written me. Nobody else knew they were there. I did. During the welcome ceremony, the dean welcomed the incoming class. As hundreds of future physicians applauded, I thought back to every moment someone had told me I wasn't enough. They had been wrong. Not because I proved them wrong, because they had never been right in the first place. Years later, after earning my white coat, I framed Noah's letter beside my medical degree. Patients often noticed the faded blue paper and asked what it was. I always smiled before answering. My first recommendation letter, and every time I walked into a patient's room, I carried the same lesson that little boy had given me long before. I earned the title of doctor. Sometimes the greatest medicine isn't found in a prescription. Sometimes it's simply staying beside someone until they believe tomorrow is still worth reaching.